We got a reflection of that in the last few moments with an update from the Kremlin on these reports, or a reaction to these reports of Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump having a call last week. They said that this is completely false. This came from Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin's chief spokesman. He said there was no conversation, and he reiterated the line we got last week was that there are no specific plans for Vladimir Putin to speak to Trump.
The news of a possible phone call between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin about the ongoing Ukraine conflict stirred heated discussions and raised questions about U.S.-Russia relations in a tense international climate. Though the Kremlin quickly denied the call's existence, the possibility alone drew immediate reactions from both allies and adversaries. Was there a call? If so, what might it mean for the conflict, the U.S. foreign policy stance, and the geopolitical balance? To break down these questions, let's explore the details of what was reported, examine the reactions, and analyze the larger context of Trump's foreign policy approach, particularly toward Russia and Ukraine. The reported call between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin allegedly occurred shortly after the recent U.S. presidential election. According to unverified reports from sources like The Washington Post and Reuters, Trump advised Putin not to escalate the situation in Ukraine. The report stated that Trump reminded Putin of the U.S.'s considerable military presence in Ukraine, which could act as a deterrent to Russia expanding its offensive operations. This alleged conversation, if true, would be the first direct communication between the two leaders since the election.
So we knew there was going to be a call at some point between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, given the Kremlin's overtures towards the president-elect at the end of last week, and it seems it has already happened. Both the Washington Post in the US and the Reuters news agency are reporting this call took place. The Washington Post saying it took place on Thursday, much earlier than everyone thought of.
However, shortly after these reports surfaced, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov quickly dismissed them as completely false. According to the Kremlin, there were no specific plans for Putin and Trump to talk, and there had been no recent communication. Despite these denials, the possibility of the call and its potential implications has already generated significant attention. For many allies, particularly in Europe, the news raised concerns that Trump's presidency might align more closely with Russian interests, leading to a reduction in military aid to Ukraine and a push for a quick peace deal. This perceived shift is partly based on Trump's previous statements, where he vowed to cut military aid to Ukraine and end the conflict rapidly. While ending the conflict is an admirable goal, his vague assurances and unclear approach leave U.S. allies uncertain about his specific plans. What would a peace deal look like under Trump's administration? Would it favor Russia's interests? These questions are unsettling, especially for European nations who feel the threat of Russian aggression on their borders. The United Kingdom's reaction to the alleged Trump-Putin call reflects this uncertainty. On one hand, officials like John Healey have tried to put on a brave face to prevent premature conflict with a newly elected U.S. administration. The UK seems to be hedging its bets, aware that Trump will hold office for the next 4 years and preferring diplomacy over an immediate confrontation. Thus, rather than making direct criticisms, the UK has opted for a diplomatic strategy, what could be described as a charm offensive, to persuade Trump to support Ukraine and align more closely with Western Europe's concerns. Yet, underlying this diplomatic approach is a palpable fear that Trump might abandon Ukraine, leaving it vulnerable to Russian advances. One significant factor that fuels speculation about the alleged call and Trump's approach to Russia is his past relationship with Putin. During Trump's previous presidency, there were several instances of friendly overtures between the two leaders. Many Western allies feared that Trump's amicable relationship with Putin could translate into a foreign policy that prioritizes Russian interests, potentially to the detriment of NATO's influence and unity. This fear is compounded by Putin's recent statements about Trump. Putin publicly congratulated Trump on his electoral victory, praising his resilience and bravery during what Putin referred to as an assassination attempt over the summer. By referring to Trump as a real man, Putin likely intends to foster a personal connection, perhaps in the hope of influencing Trump's foreign policy decisions. Such remarks are seen by some as a subtle signal that Putin hopes to rekindle the rapport the two leaders once shared. The Kremlin's interest in re-establishing a strong bond with Trump is clear, but the specifics of how Trump might respond remain ambiguous. Assuming for a moment that the call did happen, Trump's reported reminder to Putin of America's sizable military presence in Ukraine could serve as a calculated diplomatic warning. This reminder could be intended to signal to Putin that the U.S. remains prepared to defend Ukrainian sovereignty, despite Trump's public promises to reduce aid and push for peace. This approach might be designed to strike a balance, leveraging America's military strength as a deterrent without committing to further escalation. If so, it reflects a more traditional approach to diplomacy, one that prioritizes deterrence while avoiding direct confrontation. Yet, Trump's unpredictable nature makes it difficult to know if this stance would remain consistent. His position on Ukraine has fluctuated, often aligned with statements that question the need for U.S. involvement abroad. This uncertainty complicates the work of U.S. allies, who might feel compelled to either strengthen their own defenses or engage diplomatically with Trump to secure his continued support for Ukraine. For Ukraine, the prospect of reduced U.S. military aid is deeply concerning. The country has relied on Western support to defend against Russian aggression, and any indication that the U.S. might scale back its assistance could embolden Russian forces. If the call happened as reported, Ukraine might find a degree of relief that Trump allegedly warned Putin against further escalation. However, the lack of a clear, long-term commitment from Trump regarding military aid leaves Ukrainian leaders in a precarious position. The anxiety isn't limited to Ukraine. European nations, especially those with direct or historical tensions with Russia, are closely monitoring U.S.-Russia relations. Trump's previous admiration for Putin raises concerns that his approach to foreign policy might sideline NATO allies, leaving European nations to confront Russian threats independently. For countries in Eastern Europe that share borders with Russia or have sizable Russian populations, this prospect is particularly alarming. Notably, the discussion about Trump's foreign policy comes as Russia itself seems to be launching a charm offensive aimed at Western leaders. Russia's diplomatic overtures, including Putin's personal praise of Trump, might be part of a broader strategy to weaken Western unity on sanctions and military support for Ukraine. By building rapport with Trump, Russia could be positioning itself to negotiate favorable terms in future discussions, potentially convincing the U.S. to reduce its involvement in Ukraine. This charm offensive isn't limited to the U.S. Russia has also shown interest in improving relations with other NATO nations. By fostering divisions within the alliance, Russia could undermine NATO's cohesion, making it easier to achieve its strategic goals. The timing of these diplomatic gestures suggests that Russia is keenly aware of the shifting political landscape and is actively working to shape it in its favor. Whether the Trump-Putin call actually took place or not, the response to this possibility highlights a critical theme in international relations: the influence of perception. Even a rumored call between Trump and Putin was enough to stir anxiety among U.S. allies, reflecting concerns about Trump's potential foreign policy approach. While Trump's statements on reducing military aid to Ukraine and ending the conflict are not new, they lack the clarity and detail needed to reassure U.S. allies. The question remains: will Trump's administration prioritize America's strategic alliances, or will it seek closer ties with Russia, potentially at the expense of Ukraine and European security? As the world watches these developments, U.S. allies are left with limited options. For now, diplomatic overtures, caution, and strategic preparation seem to be the prevailing strategies among nations like the UK. With both Trump and Putin's future actions remaining unpredictable, the international community faces a period of heightened tension and careful recalibration. The impact of Trump's possible new term on the Ukraine conflict and on global stability more broadly remains to be seen. The international community remains watchful, hoping for clear signals from Trump on how he intends to address one of the world's most pressing conflicts. The months ahead will be critical in determining whether Trump's administration can balance diplomatic relationships and support for Ukraine, or whether a new chapter in U.S.-Russia relations will reshape the geopolitical landscape.